In section 48 of Counsels and Maxims, Schopenhauer gives us an extended set of thoughts about the nature of chance and the role of fate, random chance in our lives. Here's what he writes. An ancient writer says, very truly, that there are three great powers in the world: sagacity, strength, and luck. Sunetos kratos tuku. I think the last is the most efficacious. A man's life is like the voyage of a ship, where luck, secunda aut adversa fortuna, acts the part of the wind, and speeds the vessel on its way, or drives it far out of its course. All that the man can do for himself is of little avail, like the rudder which, if worked hard and continuously, may help in the navigation of the ship, and yet all may be lost again by a sudden squall. But if the wind is only in the right quarter, the ship will sail on, and so as not to need any steering. The power of luck is nowhere better expressed than in a certain Spanish proverb: Da ventura a tu hijo y échalo en el mar. Give your son luck, and then throw him into the sea. So this first paragraph, Schopenhauer extolling the value of chance, saying of the three great forces in life: sagacity, your own wisdom and cleverness; strength, your own sort of force and social and material might; and luck. Luck is by far the greatest determinant of our life outcomes. If you happen, as the Spanish say, if you can only give your son luck, you can cast him into the ocean, and things will go well for him. Going on. Still, chance, it may be said, is a malignant power, and as little as possible should be left to its agency. And yet, where is there any giver who, in dispensing gifts, tells us quite clearly that we have no right to them, and that we owe them not to any merit on our part, but wholly to the goodness and grace of the giver, at the same time allowing us to cherish the joyful hope of receiving, in all humility, further undeserved gifts from the same hands? Where is there any giver like that, unless it be chance, who understands the kingly art of showing the recipient that all merit is powerless and unavailing against the royal grace and favor? Okay. Another great paragraph here, Schopenhauer telling us, noting that there's something kind of regal about chance, about fortune, about randomness, that unlike any other recipient, it tells us that its gifts are completely undeserved by us. It reminds me here very much of Fortuna from Boethius's Consolation of Philosophy. Schopenhauer here, however, praising it, right? What a glorious power differential there is between chance and us, between the giver and the recipient. No merit of ours can ever possibly account for what we get from chance. Chance, as it were, can say that to us the way nobody else can. Going on. On looking back over the course of his life, that labyrinthine way of error, a man must see many points where luck failed him and misfortune came. And then it is easy to carry self-reproach to an unjust excess. For the course of a man's life is in no wise entirely of his own making. It is the product of two factors: the series of things that happened, and his own resolves in regard to them. And these two are constantly interacting upon and modifying each other. And besides these, another influence is at work in the very limited extent of a man's horizon, whether it is that he cannot see very far ahead in respect of the plans he will adopt, or that he is still less able to predict the course of future events. His knowledge is strictly confined to present plans and present events. Hence, as long as a man's goal is far off, he cannot steer straight for it. He must be content to take a course that is approximately right, and in following the direction in which he thinks he ought to go, he will often have occasion to tack. I think part of what Schopenhauer is telling us here is very much the kind of dad advice that if your goal is far off, if you're aiming at something 10 years, 20 years distant, you can only make the most approximate move towards it. In other words, there is no precise right course to take now. You ought to think of yourself as moving in the general right direction. Okay, once you're closer, then you can adjust your final approach to actually attain the goal. But if the goal is far off, then all motion towards it is only need to be in approximately the right direction. And I think that's a good way of calming us down when we become concerned about whether we're taking precisely the right action here and now to achieve a remote goal. Okay, the remote goal requires us to take a different sort of attitude towards the suitableness of the actions we take at the present time. So present actions, present events are what we react to immediately. And so I think that plus I think the excellent expression describing human life as the labyrinthine way of error. Good parts of that paragraph. Going on. All that a man can do is to form such resolves as from time to time accord with the circumstances in which he is placed, in the hope of thus managing to advance a step nearer towards his final goal. It is usually the case that the position in which we stand and the object at which we aim resemble two tendencies working with dissimilar strength in different directions, and the course of our life is represented by their diagonal or resultant force. And here's a nice image, right? The two rays, and we follow the vector between them. The rays are our ultimate goal, which we have in mind, and our present circumstances, and they are of different forces. And so we're sort of thinking back to geometry, taking the path between them is going to be determined by their relative strengths, and you'll move roughly in that direction. That's a nice geometrical image for the kind of advice that Schopenhauer is giving us here. Terence makes the remark that life is like a game at dice, where, if the number that turns up is not precisely the one you want, you can still contrive to use it equally well. In vita est hominum quasi cum ludus tesseris, si illud quod maxime opus est iactu non cadit, illud quod sedidit forte id arte ut corrigas. And that's my Latin's not great, but I think that's roughly, I looked it up, it's roughly in the life of men when you play at some kind of game, some kind of game where you throw dice and then use the results of the dice. If the thing that you most need does not come up, you don't throw the right number, of the thing which has fallen to you by chance, you have the skill. With skill, you can correct it. So, uh, approximately what Schopenhauer has said. Going on to Schopenhauer. Or, to put the matter more shortly, life is like a game of cards, when the cards are shuffled and dealt by fate. But for my present purpose, the most suitable simile would be that of a game of chess, where the plan we determine to follow is conditioned by the play of our rival, in life by the caprice of fate. We are compelled to modify our tactics, often to such an extent that, as we carry them out, hardly a single feature of the original plan can be recognized. So here's another great example of how to think about our lives like a game of chess. You have a plan of attack, of moving your pieces, of defense, and here it is chance, the caprice of chance, the things that happen in life more or less randomly, that will be playing the opposite pieces. And as in a game of chess, you modify or even abandon your opening plan according to the opportunities or the threats that are presented by the counterplay of the opponent. If fate presses you hard on one side, you modify or abandon your original plan to defend against that threat. If fate opens up some new opportunity for you, you advance down that side of the board, down that diagonal, as prudently as possible. So again, it's sort of the dad advice here of being able to think on your feet rather than thinking of life in terms of following a fixed plan. Going on now. But above and beyond all this, there is another influence that makes itself felt in our lives. It is a trite saying, only too frequently true, that we are often more foolish than we think. On the other hand, we are often wiser than we fancy ourselves to be. This, however, is a discovery which only those can make of whom it is really true, and it takes them a long time to make it. Our brains are not the wisest part of us. In the great moments of life, when a man decides upon an important step, his action is directed not so much by any clear knowledge of the right thing to do as by an inner impulse. You may also almost call it an instinct, proceeding from the deepest foundations of his being. If, later on, he attempts to criticize his action by the light of hard and fast ideas of what is right in the abstract, those unprofitable ideas which are learnt by rote, or it may be borrowed from other people, if he begins to apply general rules, the principles which have guided others to his own case, without sufficiently weighing the maxim that one man's meat is another man's poison, then he will run great risk of doing himself an injustice. The result will show where the right course lay. It is only when a man has reached the happy age of wisdom that he is capable of just judgment in regard either to his own actions or to those of others. A long paragraph beginning with this trite saying, "We are often more foolish than we believe, and often we are wiser than we believe." Of course, this is only true of the people of whom it is true. But this interesting idea that when we're really making the critical decisions of our lives, a job, a marriage, some sort of radical change, we often find that we're not making them from some sort of clear intellectual idea of what principle requires, but rather out of a sort of a deep well of influences that have affected us. In other words, we sort of act from our deepest being when we make these kinds of decisions. And if looking back later upon those decisions, the decision to begin or end that relationship, the decision to abandon this job and move cross country, or not to do so, to pass up the opportunity to enlist in the military, etc. If we look back on those sorts of decisions that proceed from the core of our being, and look at them in the light of these unprofitable abstract ideas that we borrow from other people, that other people have put into our heads, we will reproach ourselves and even do damage to ourselves without cause. Schopenhauer seems to say, do ourselves an injustice. So it is only at the happy age of wisdom that you win the sort of right to be able to judge effectively of your own life, what your own life is and has become. You might say there's a certain kind of self-knowledge of your own deepest self and principles and motivations that comes only with old age. That as a young person, you might be more inclined to misjudge yourself according to abstract principles that don't necessarily apply to you and to your circumstances and situation. Schopenhauer goes on. It may be that this impulse or instinct is the unconscious effect of a kind of prophetic dream, which is forgotten when we awake, lending our life a uniformity of tone, a dramatic unity such as could never result from the unstable moments of consciousness, when we are so easily led into error, so liable to strike a false note. It is in virtue of some such prophetic dream that a man feels himself called to great achievements in a special sphere, and works in that direction from his youth up out of an inner and secret feeling that this is his true path, just as by a similar instinct the bee is led to build up its cells in the comb. This is the impulse which Balthasar Gracian calls la gran synderisis, the great power of moral discernment. It is something that a man instinctively feels to be his salvation, without which he were lost. An interesting commentary now here about this kind of prophetic dream, unconscious prophetic dream, maybe a sort of sense of self that we have, that we forget when awake, right? A sense that I am meant to do this. This is the right thing for me. I don't think Schopenhauer is really getting mystical here so much as he's referring to the fact that there's a great deal going on in us below the level of conscious mind and intellectual knowledge and choosing. It's not a matter of knowing principles and applying them to life. It's more a matter of being and becoming what we are. And that's the sort of feel that I'm getting off of this. So now the final paragraph of the section, Schopenhauer writes, "To act in accordance with abstract principles is a difficult matter, and a great deal of practice will be required before you can be even occasionally successful. It often happens that the principles do not fit in with your particular case. But every man has certain innate concrete principles, a part, as it were, of the very blood that flows in his veins, the sum or result, in fact, of all his thoughts, feelings, and volitions. Usually, he has no knowledge of them in any abstract form. It is only when he looks back upon the course that his life has taken that he becomes aware of having been always led on by them, as though they formed an invisible clue which he had followed unawares." That's the end of section 48 of Counsels and Maxims. And a very Nietzschean note, I think, in fact, that there is every man has concrete principles, sort of the personality that he has formed, the very blood in his veins, the thought, feelings, and volitions that make him up. This is the kind of thing which one acquires, it seems, a greater knowledge of the older and wiser one becomes, looking back on your life, seeing now, these have been the principles of my life. Not abstract ones that are known intellectually, but these concrete principles that I know, it seems, through the kind of semi-subconscious, deep experience of being me, of reflecting upon myself and acquiring this kind of knowledge. A kind of invisible clue that I've been following my whole life that's led me to the place where I am now. So, an interesting set of reflections upon the nature of chance and its large role in our life, with some advice on how we should think about it, how we should govern ourselves, and avoid useless self-reproach, especially in cases where fate has turned against us. So that's section 48 of Schopenhauer's Counsels and Maxims. We'll talk about section 49 in the next video. Thanks for watching today. Goodbye.